The wildflowers were impossible to ignore, their vibrant purple and yellow petals arranged in a chipped clay pitcher that sat dead center on his kitchen table. And Henrik Munroe knew with absolute certainty that he had not picked them himself. He stood in the doorway of his modest cabin, still holding the axe he had been using to split firewood for the better part of the afternoon, and stared at the arrangement as though it might suddenly sprout legs and explain itself. The late summer sun slanted through his single window, illuminating dust motes that danced around the flowers like tiny golden sprites. Henrik set the axe carefully against the doorframe and approached the table with the same caution he might use when encountering a bear in the woods. The pitcher was one he recognized, having belonged to his grandmother before she passed and left him this homestead on the edge of the Thornwood frontier. He had kept it stored in the back of his cupboard, wrapped in an old cloth to prevent it from chipping further. Someone had gone through his things, found it, filled it with water and arranged wildflowers in it with what he had to grudgingly admit was a pleasant eye for composition. The purple blooms were some kind of aster, he thought, mixed with golden meadow flowers he could not name. Henrik was 32 years old, a veteran of the border wars who had retired to this isolated patch of land 3 years ago to escape the memories of battle and the politics of town life. He lived alone, kept to himself, and made the 20-mile journey to the nearest settlement of Milford only when absolutely necessary to trade furs and smoked meat for supplies. His closest neighbor was old Thomas Garrett, and that grizzled hermit lived a good 8 miles south through difficult terrain. No one came out here. No one had any reason to. Henrik walked slowly around the table, examining the flowers from every angle as though they might reveal their secrets. There were no muddy footprints on his swept floor, no signs of forced entry at his door or windows. Everything else in the cabin appeared exactly as he had left it that morning when he went outside to work. His bed was still neatly made in the corner, his few dishes were still stacked on the shelf beside his small stove, his hunting rifle still hung above the mantel, only the flowers were different. He reached out and touched one of the purple petals, half expecting it to vanish like morning dew, but it was solid and real beneath his calloused fingers. Someone had been in his home. Someone had touched his grandmother's pitcher. Someone had picked these flowers and brought them here. The thought sent a chill down his spine despite the warmth of the late afternoon. Henrik had survived the border wars by being careful, by trusting his instincts, by never assuming he was safe. He moved to the window and scanned the tree line that bordered his property, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that someone might still be watching. The forest stood silent and still, the pines and oaks swaying gently in the breeze, revealing nothing. He checked the cabin more thoroughly then, looking under the bed, opening the cupboards, even climbing up to peer into the small loft where he stored dried herbs and preserved foods. Everything was accounted for. Nothing was missing. Only the flowers had been added. Henrik ate his supper that evening with the flowers still sitting on the table, their cheerful colors seeming almost mocking in the fading light. He had made a simple stew from dried venison and root vegetables, and he ate it mechanically while his mind worked through possibilities. A secret admirer seemed laughable given his isolation and his deliberate avoidance of social situations. A prankster would have done something more obviously disruptive. A thief would have actually stolen something. That night he slept poorly, waking at every creak of the cabin settling, every rustle of wind through the trees. He kept his rifle close and his hunting knife under his pillow, but nothing happened. The cabin remained secure, the forest remained quiet, and when dawn finally broke, Henrik rose feeling foolish for his paranoia but no less confused about the flowers. They were still there, still fresh, still beautiful in their simple way. Henrik decided to go about his normal routine, but he found himself constantly glancing toward the cabin as he worked through his morning chores. He fed the chickens in their small coop, checked the snares he had set along the forest edge, and began the work of tanning the deer hide he had stretched on a frame behind the cabin. All the while, his attention kept drifting back to that single window, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone inside. It was early afternoon when he noticed the second oddity. He had gone to the well to draw water and found the rope that held his bucket had been carefully coiled instead of being left in its usual slightly tangled heap. Henrik stood very still, his hand on the well's stone rim, and forced himself to think clearly. He was not going mad. These changes were real. Someone was definitely coming here, doing small things and leaving without confronting him. The question was why. He filled his bucket with water and carried it back to the cabin, deliberately leaving the door open this time as he entered. If someone was watching, let them see he was not afraid. He poured the water into his kettle and set it on the stove to heat, then positioned himself near the window where he could observe the clearing around his home while appearing to be simply going about his business. Henrik spent the next 3 days in a state of heightened awareness. He varied his routine, sometimes working far from the cabin, sometimes staying inside for long stretches. He set small, subtle markers around his property, tiny arrangements of twigs and stones that would be disturbed if someone passed by them. And the strange occurrences continued. His woodpile, which he had left in a somewhat haphazard stack, was neatly arranged one morning. A torn shirt he had left draped over a chair was found carefully folded. The floors seemed to be swept cleaner than he remembered leaving them. And every few days, the flowers in the pitcher were replaced with fresh ones, the old blooms removed so cleanly that he never found any trace of discarded petals. On the 8th day, Henrik decided to try something different. He left the cabin at his usual morning hour, making a deliberate show of heading into the forest with his rifle as though going hunting. But instead of actually going far, he circled back through the thick underbrush, moving with the silent, careful steps he had learned during his years as a scout in the border wars. He positioned himself in a dense thicket of blackberry brambles about 50 yards from his cabin, where he had a clear view of his front door and the surrounding clearing. Then he waited. The sun climbed higher, and Henrik remained motionless despite the discomfort of his hiding spot, despite the insects that crawled across his skin, despite the thorns that pressed against his back. He had waited in worse conditions for longer periods during the war. He could be patient. It was nearly noon when he finally saw movement at the edge of the clearing opposite his position. His breath caught in his throat, and he forced himself to remain absolutely still as a figure emerged from between 2 large oak trees. She was an orc. Henrik had seen orcs before, had fought against them during the border wars when raiding parties clashed with human settlements. But he had never seen one quite like this, and certainly never in such an unexpected context. She was young, probably close to his own age in human terms, though he knew orc aging was slightly different. Her skin was a deep forest green, darker than many orcs he had encountered, and it seemed to catch the dappled sunlight in a way that made her appear almost to glow. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the characteristic broad shoulders and athletic build of her people, though she moved with a grace that seemed at odds with the brutal efficiency he had come to associate with orc warriors. She wore simple clothing, a tunic and trousers that appeared to be made from hide and rough spun cloth, both well worn and patched in places. Her black hair was long and thick, pulled back into a braid that hung down her back. Even from this distance, He could see the small tusks that protruded from her lower jaw, a mark of her heritage. Her ears were pointed, pricking forward as she approached his cabin with obvious caution. Henrik's hand tightened on his rifle, but he did not raise it. She was not armed that he could see, carried no weapons at all, in fact. Instead, she held something in her hands, something he could not quite make out from this distance. The orc woman approached his cabin slowly, her head constantly moving as she scanned the surrounding forest. She was clearly nervous, clearly ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. When she reached his door, she paused and seemed to listen intently. Henrik held his breath, wondering what he should do. He could call out, reveal himself, confront her. Or he could continue to watch and learn more about what was happening. After a long moment, the orc woman seemed to decide the coast was clear. She pushed open his door, which he had deliberately left unlatched, and slipped inside. Henrik waited, his heart pounding now with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. What was an orc doing in his cabin? Why had she been coming here? The flowers, the cleaning, all of it made even less sense now than before. She emerged after perhaps 10 minutes, no longer carrying whatever she had brought inside. She pulled his door closed carefully, then stood for a moment looking at the cabin with an expression that Henrik could not quite interpret from this distance. There was something almost wistful in the way she tilted her head, something gentle that completely contradicted everything he had been taught about orcs during the war. Then she turned and walked back toward the forest, moving quickly now, and within moments she had disappeared between the trees as silently as she had come. Henrik remained in his hiding spot for another hour, making absolutely certain she was not coming back, before he finally emerged from the brambles and made his way back to his cabin. His hands were shaking slightly as he pushed open the door, unsure what he would find inside. Fresh flowers in the pitcher, the same purple asters and golden meadow blooms, arranged with care, and on the table beside them, a small cloth bundle that had not been there before. Henrik approached it slowly and carefully unwrapped the cloth to reveal its contents. Inside were 3 small cakes, the kind made from ground nuts and honey, shaped into rough circles and still slightly warm. They smelled delicious, rich and sweet, and completely unexpected. He picked one up and turned it over in his hand, examining it for any sign of tampering or poison, but it appeared to be exactly what it seemed to be, a simple, homemade treat. He sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the cakes, his mind reeling. An orc woman had been sneaking into his cabin to bring him flowers and food. An orc woman had been cleaning his home and organizing his things. It made no sense. Orcs and humans were enemies. The border wars had only officially ended 5 years ago, and tensions were still high. There were towns where orcs were killed on sight, where humans were warned never to venture into orc territories alone. Yet this orc woman had been coming here, doing kind things, leaving gifts. Henrik picked up one of the cakes, and after a moment of hesitation, took a small bite. The flavor burst across his tongue, nutty and sweet and absolutely wonderful. He had not had anything this good since before the war, since his mother was still alive and baking in the kitchen of his childhood home. He ate the rest of the cake slowly, savoring it, and by the time he finished he had made a decision. He needed to know why she was doing this. He needed to talk to her. But how? She clearly wanted to avoid him, clearly came only when she thought he was away. If he tried to confront her directly, she would likely flee and never return. Henrik had learned during his years as a scout that sometimes the best way to approach a wary target was indirectly, patiently, by making yourself seem less threatening rather than more. He spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. He found a piece of paper, one of the few sheets he had kept for the occasional need to make notes or records, and a piece of charcoal for writing. He thought carefully about what to write, knowing that his words might determine whether she ever came back. Finally, he settled on something simple. "Thank you for the flowers and the cakes. They are appreciated. You do not need to hide." He left the note on the table, weighted down with a smooth river stone he kept on his mantle. Then, the next morning, he made another deliberate show of leaving for the day, heading into the forest with his rifle and his pack as though planning to be gone for many hours. He did not go far. He found another hiding spot, this one closer to the cabin and with an even better view of the door. And he waited again. She came sooner this time, arriving in the mid-morning when the sun was still low enough to cast long shadows across the clearing. Henrik watched as she approached his door, watched as she opened it and went inside. He saw the exact moment when she must have found the note, because she emerged again almost immediately, standing in his doorway with the paper in her hand. Her face was easier to see now in the better light, and Henrik was struck by how expressive it was. He had always thought of orcs as brutal and savage, but this woman's face showed clear intelligence and emotion. She looked confused, perhaps a bit frightened, definitely uncertain. She read the note several times, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the words, then looked around the clearing as though expecting him to suddenly appear. After a long moment, she went back inside. This time she stayed longer, and when she emerged, she no longer had the note. She had taken it with her or left it inside. She walked away quickly, glancing back at the cabin several times before disappearing into the forest. Henrik waited another hour, then returned to his cabin. Inside, he found fresh flowers again, and another small bundle on the table. This time it contained a portion of smoked fish, well prepared and carefully wrapped. And beside it, written on the back of his own note in shaky but readable script, were new words. "I will go if you want. I mean no harm." His chest tightened as he read her response. The handwriting was unpracticed, the letters formed with obvious effort, but the message was clear. She thought he might be telling her to leave. She was giving him the option to send her away. Henrik sat down and immediately began writing a new note. His hands, which had remained steady through countless battles, shook slightly as he formed the words. "Please do not go. I would like to meet you if you are willing. I will be here tomorrow at midday. My name is Henrik." He left the note on the table and forced himself to actually leave his property this time, to go and check his trap lines and give her space to find his message without feeling watched. When he returned that evening, the note was gone, and a single purple aster had been placed carefully on his pillow. He took that as a yes. The next day, Henrik rose earlier than usual and spent extra time making himself presentable. He washed thoroughly in cold water from the well, shaved the stubble from his face, and put on his cleanest shirt. He felt oddly nervous, like a young man preparing for his first dance rather than a war veteran about to meet with someone who had been, until very recently, considered an enemy. He prepared tea, using some of the precious leaves he saved for special occasions, and set out 2 cups on his table. Then he sat down to wait, watching the sun climb higher through his window, trying to calm the anxious beating of his heart. Midday came and went. Henrik told himself to be patient, that she might be cautious, that she might be watching to make sure this was not a trap. He kept his rifle deliberately stored in the corner, visible but not threatening. He wanted her to see he meant no harm. It was perhaps an hour past noon when he finally heard light footsteps outside his door. Henrik stood slowly, not wanting to startle her, and called out in what he hoped was a calm, friendly voice. "You are welcome to come in. The door is not locked." There was a long pause. Henrik held his breath, afraid she might bolt. But then the door opened slowly and she stepped inside. She was even more striking up close. Her green skin had a slight sheen to it, healthy and vibrant. Her eyes were a warm amber color, large and intelligent, and they watched him with a mixture of wariness and something that might have been hope. She was as tall as he remembered, and her build, while strong and athletic, had curves that his mind catalogued before he could stop himself. She wore the same simple clothing as before, but he could see now that everything was very clean and well-maintained despite the patches and wear. "Hello," Henrik said, keeping his voice gentle. "Thank you for coming." She did not respond immediately, just stood near the door as though ready to flee at any moment. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and he could see they were trembling slightly. "I will not hurt you," he added. "I just wanted to say thank you in person, for the flowers and the food, and for the help around the cabin. You are not angry." Her voice was rougher than a human woman's would have been, slightly deeper, but there was a melodic quality to it that he had not expected. She spoke human common tongue with only a slight accent, better than many orcs he had encountered during the war. "Not angry at all," Henrik said. "Confused, maybe. I do not understand why you have been doing these things, but not angry." She shifted her weight from foot to foot, a gesture that seemed almost childlike in its nervousness. "I did not mean to intrude. I know this is your home. I should not have come inside without permission." "Well, you have permission now," Henrik said. "Please sit down if you would like. I made tea." She looked at the table, at the 2 cups he had set out, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe touched that he had prepared for her. Very slowly, moving as though she expected him to suddenly change his mind and attack, she crossed to the table and lowered herself into the chair opposite his. Henrik poured tea for both of them, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. He slid 1 cup across the table to her and watched as she wrapped her hands around it, seeming to take comfort from its warmth despite the summer heat outside. "I am Henrik Munroe," he said, settling into his own chair. "Though I suppose you might already know that if you have been around for a while." "I know," she said quietly. "I have seen your name on papers inside, on the letter from your cousin about your grandmother's passing." Henrik felt a small jolt at that. Those papers were private, stored in a wooden box under his bed. She had been more thorough in her explorations of his cabin than he had realized, but he pushed down the instinctive flash of territorial discomfort. If she had meant him harm, she had plenty of opportunities to do so already. "And your name?" he asked, "if you are willing to share it." She hesitated, then lifted her chin in a gesture that seemed almost defiant. "I am called Greta, just Greta. I have no clan name anymore." There was pain in those words, old pain that had settled deep. Henrik recognized it because he carried similar pain himself. "No clan name," he repeated carefully. "Does that mean you are alone?" "Yes." She took a small sip of the tea and her eyes widened slightly at the taste. "This is good." "It is a luxury I allow myself occasionally," Henrik said. "You are welcome to it." He paused, trying to figure out how to ask the questions crowding his mind without making her flee. "Greta, I need to ask, why have you been coming here? Why the flowers and the food?" She stared down into her tea, her fingers tightening around the cup. For a long moment he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. "Because you live alone. Because you seem lonely. Because I know what that feels like." The simple honesty of her answer struck him harder than he expected. Henrik swallowed past a sudden tightness in his throat. "You have been watching me." "Yes, I am sorry. I know it is wrong." She still would not meet his eyes. "I found this place by accident 6 weeks ago. I was foraging and I came across your cabin. I saw you outside working and I hid to watch. You seemed sad. You reminded me of myself. So you decided to leave me flowers. Not at first. At first I just watched sometimes from the forest. I told myself I was being careful, making sure there was no danger in this area. But really I was lonely, and watching you made me feel less alone. Her tusks caught the light as she spoke, small and delicate compared to male orcs he had seen. Then one day I saw the wildflowers growing near the stream, and I thought they were beautiful, and I thought maybe you would think so too. So I picked them, and I told myself I would just leave them outside your door. But when I got here you were gone, and the door was open, and I saw the picture inside. I knew I should not go in, but I did anyway. And you kept coming back, Henrik said. I kept coming back, she agreed. Each time I told myself it would be the last time. Each time I found another reason to return. To bring food because I could not eat all I hunted alone. To fix the hem on your shirt because I noticed it was torn. To sweep because I know how dust gathers when you live in the forest. You have been kind to me, Henrik said slowly, even though you do not know me, even though we are supposed to be enemies. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his, and he saw they were bright with unshed tears. I am tired of enemies. I am tired of fighting and hiding and being afraid. You looked like someone who might be tired of it too. Henrik felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he had built during the war to protect himself from feeling too much. This orc woman, this stranger, had seen something in him that he had barely admitted to himself. He was lonely. He was sad. He had chosen isolation because it felt safer than risking connection, but safety and happiness were not the same thing. I am tired, he admitted. I came out here to escape the war, the violence, the politics, but I think maybe I went too far. It has been a long time since I spoke to anyone for more than a few minutes. I know, Greta said. I watched you trade in Milford once. You did not smile or speak unless necessary. You left as soon as your business was done. You followed me to Milford. Only once. I wanted to make sure you were not dangerous, that you were not someone who would hunt me if he knew I was nearby. She took another sip of her tea, and he noticed her hands had stopped shaking. I saw how the other humans looked at you, like they wanted you to stay and talk, but you would not. Like they thought you were strange for living so far out. It made me sad for you. Henrik laughed, a short, surprised sound. You felt sorry for me. An orc felt sorry for a human. Why is that funny? Greta asked, tilting her head. Pain is pain. Loneliness is loneliness. It does not matter what color our skin is. She was right, of course. Henrik sobered quickly, feeling ashamed of his own reaction. I apologize. You are absolutely right. I have just been taught for so long to think of orcs as the enemy. It is strange to have one sitting in my kitchen drinking tea and telling me she was worried about my happiness. I understand, Greta said. I was taught that all humans are cruel and greedy, that they would kill me as soon as look at me. But you have not. You invited me to sit. You gave me tea. You are listening to me talk, which no one has done in a very long time. How long? Henrik asked. How long since you had someone to talk to? 8 months. That is when my clan cast me out. Why were you cast out? Greta's expression shuddered, becoming carefully blank. Because I refused to raid a human village. Because I said I was tired of the fighting, tired of the killing. Because I told our chief that the war was over and we should find peace, not continue the cycle of revenge. Her voice was bitter now. They called me a coward and a traitor. They said I was weak, that I brought shame on the clan. My mother did not speak for me. My father ordered me to leave and never return. Henrik felt a wave of sympathy so strong it surprised him. That must have been terrible. It was the worst day of my life, Greta said simply. But also, in some ways, it was freeing. I did not have to fight anymore. I did not have to hurt people. I could choose my own path, even if that path was lonely. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Henrik found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed before. There was a small scar on her left cheek, faint but visible. Her hands, wrapped around the teacup, were calloused from work. She looked tired, he realized. Not just physically tired, though there was that too, but soul tired in the way of someone who had carried too much for too long. "Where do you live?" he asked. "If you do not mind my asking." "In a cave about 3 miles north of here, near the waterfall on the upper ridge." Henrik knew the area she meant. It was remote and difficult to access, defensible but isolated. That must be cold in winter. "I will manage," Greta said, though there was uncertainty in her voice. "I have survived one winter already. Alone. Henrik made a decision then, one that probably would have seemed insane to his former self, to the soldier who had fought against orcs in the border wars. But that man seemed very far away now, and the woman sitting across from him seemed very real and very in need of kindness. "You do not have to be alone anymore," he said. "If you do not want to be." Greta's head snapped up, her amber eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean you are welcome here. To visit, to talk, to bring flowers if you want, though you do not need to hide anymore." Henrik smiled, surprising himself with how natural it felt. "I would be happy to have a friend." "A friend," Greta repeated as though testing the word. "You would be friends with an orc." "I would be friends with you," Henrik corrected. "If you would be friends with a human." She stared at him for a long moment, and he watched a range of emotions play across her face. Disbelief, hope, fear, and finally something that looked like cautious joy. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like that very much." They finished their tea in a more comfortable silence after that, the tension that had filled the cabin slowly dissipating. When Greta finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Henrik, may I still bring you flowers sometimes, even though I do not need to hide?" "I would be disappointed if you stopped," he said honestly. "They make the cabin feel more like a home." She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. Her tusks caught the light, and her eyes crinkled at the corners, and Henrik felt his breath catch slightly at how genuinely beautiful she looked. After she left, he sat at his table for a long time, staring at the flowers she had brought, thinking about how strange and unexpected life could be. A month ago he had been alone, isolated, keeping the world at arm's length. Now he had an orc woman who wanted to be his friend, who had been caring for him in secret, who smiled at him like he had given her something precious. The world, it seemed, was full of surprises. Over the following weeks, Greta became a regular presence in Henrik's life. She did not come every day, but several times a week she would emerge from the forest, usually in the late morning or early afternoon, and they would spend time together. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories about their lives and their pasts. Sometimes they worked together on various tasks around the cabin and the property. Henrik learned that Greta was an excellent hunter, far better than he was, with a natural tracking ability that left him amazed. She taught him tricks for reading signs in the forest, for moving more quietly, for understanding animal behavior. In return, he taught her to read better, spending patient hours helping her practice with the few books he owned. She was hungry for knowledge, soaking up everything he could teach her about letters and words and the way written language worked. They also worked together to improve the cabin. Greta helped him repair the roof, which had been leaking slightly during the summer rains. Henrik was surprised by her strength, watching her lift heavy logs that would have required 2 men, but also by her gentleness when doing more delicate work. She patched the chinking between the logs with careful precision, making sure every gap was sealed properly for the coming winter. In return, Henrik insisted on helping her improve her cave dwelling. He hiked up to the waterfall with her one day, bringing tools and supplies, and was appalled by the conditions she had been living in. The cave was barely more than a deep crevice in the rock face, cold and damp, and offering minimal protection from the elements. "You cannot stay here through another winter," he said flatly, standing in the entrance and looking at her meager possessions. "A bedroll, a few cooking implements, a small store of dried foods. You will freeze." "I survived last year," Greta said, but she did not sound convinced. "Barely, I would wager." Henrik turned to look at her seriously. "Greta, this is not sustainable. You need better shelter." "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "No clan will take me back. Human towns will not accept me. This is what I have." Henrik opened his mouth to suggest the obvious solution, then closed it again. It was too soon. They had known each other for less than a month. He could not just invite her to live with him, no matter how much sense it might make practically. People in town already thought he was strange. If they found out he was living with an orc woman, there would be trouble, possibly serious trouble. But he could help make this place better, at least for now. They spent the next several days building a proper wall for the front of the cave, using stones and mortar to create a barrier that could hold in heat and keep out the worst of the wind. Henrik showed Greta how to build a proper chimney for her fire pit so the smoke would vent correctly. They installed a door made from rough planks, with leather hinges and a simple latch. By the time they finished, the cave was transformed into something that could almost be called cozy. It would never be as comfortable as his cabin, but it was a vast improvement over what she had before. Greta looked around her improved home with obvious emotion, her eyes bright. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "No one has ever helped me like this." "You are my friend," Henrik said simply. "Friends help each other." She hugged him then, suddenly and fiercely, her strong arms wrapping around him in an embrace that lifted him slightly off his feet. Henrik stiffened in surprise for a moment, then carefully returned the hug, his hands resting on her broad back. She smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something earthy and distinctly her. When she set him down and stepped back, both of them seemed slightly flustered. "Sorry," Greta muttered. "I did not mean to grab you like that." "It is fine," Henrik said, though his heart was beating faster than it should. Really. It was nice. The summer days grew shorter, and Henrik found himself looking forward to Greta's visits with an eagerness that surprised him. He started keeping better food in the cabin, making sure he had ingredients for the meals she seemed to enjoy. He found himself thinking about her when she was not there, wondering what she was doing, hoping she was safe and warm and not too lonely in her cave. It was not until late one evening, sitting alone by his fire, and realizing he was disappointed she had not visited that day, that Henrik admitted to himself what was happening. He was developing feelings for Greta that went beyond friendship. He looked forward to her smile, to the sound of her laugh, to the way she tilted her head when she was thinking deeply about something. He noticed the grace in her movements, the strength in her hands, the intelligence in her eyes. He was falling for an orc woman, and he had no idea what to do about it. The thought terrified him on multiple levels. First, there was the practical concern. Any relationship between a human and an orc was taboo, forbidden by both societies. If people found out, there would be consequences. He could be driven from his home, or worse. Greta could be hunted down. Second, there was the question of whether she could possibly feel the same way. She had said she wanted friendship, wanted someone to talk to. That did not mean she was interested in anything more. Henrik had no idea if orcs even looked at humans that way, if such attraction was even possible from her perspective. Third, and perhaps most importantly, there was his own fear of being hurt. Henrik had lost so many people during the war. Friends, fellow soldiers, family members. His parents had died of fever while he was away fighting. His grandmother had passed while he was building this cabin. He had deliberately isolated himself to avoid more loss, more pain. Opening his heart to Greta meant making himself vulnerable again, and he was not sure he was ready for that. But despite all these concerns, the feelings continued to grow. It came to a head on a cool morning in early autumn. Henrik woke to find frost on the grass outside his cabin, the first real sign that winter was approaching. He was eating a simple breakfast of porridge when he heard a commotion outside, the sound of something large moving through the brush at the edge of his property. He grabbed his rifle and went to investigate, stepping outside cautiously. What he found made his blood run cold. Greta was limping toward his cabin, her arm pressed against her side, her clothing torn and bloody. Her face was set in a grimace of pain, and she was leaving a trail of dark green blood on the ground behind her. "Henrik," she gasped when she saw him. "I am sorry to come like this." I had nowhere else to go. He ran to her, catching her as she stumbled. "What happened? Who did this?" "Hunters. 3 of them. They found my cave and decided I was a monster that needed to be killed." She winced as he helped support her weight. "I fought them off, but one of them had a spear. Got me in the side before I could disarm him." Henrik felt a surge of anger so intense it made his vision blur. "Did you kill them?" "No, just scared them off." Greta's breathing was labored. "I think they will come back, though, with more men." "Let's get you inside," Henrik said, pushing down his rage to focus on the immediate problem. He half carried her into the cabin and helped her sit on his bed. "Let me see the wound." Greta lifted her arm, and Henrik carefully peeled back her torn tunic. The spear had caught her along the ribs, a deep gash that was bleeding sluggishly but steadily. It was serious but not immediately life-threatening if he could stop the bleeding and prevent infection. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, moving to gather his medical supplies. He had learned field medicine during the war, had treated wounds far worse than this under much worse conditions. But his hands shook as he prepared needle and thread, as he heated water to clean the wound. This was Greta. The thought of her in pain made him feel sick. She did not cry out as he cleaned the wound with hot water and whiskey, though he saw her jaw clench and her hands grip the edge of the bed hard enough that her knuckles turned pale. She breathed in harsh, controlled gasps as he stitched the gash closed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling above his bed. "Almost done," Henrik murmured, trying to keep his hands steady. "You are doing great, just a few more stitches." When he finally tied off the last stitch and bandaged her side, Greta let out a long, shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you would help me." "Of course I would help you," Henrik said roughly. "Greta, you are bleeding and hurt. Did you think I would turn you away?" Some would have. Some would have seen this as a convenient opportunity to let an orc die. The casual way she said it, as though it was simply a fact of life, broke something in Henrik's chest. He sat down beside her on the bed and very carefully took her hand. "I am not some people. You are my friend, and I will not let anything happen to you if I can prevent it." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. Why do you care so much about an orc? I do not understand." "Because you are not just an orc," Henrik said. "You are Greta. You are kind and thoughtful and brave. You brought me flowers when I was lonely. You helped me fix my roof. You made me laugh for the first time in years. Why would I not care about you?" "Henrik," she started, but he shook his head. "You need to rest now. We can talk later. Right now you need to heal." He started to stand, but she tightened her grip on his hand. "Stay," she said quietly. "Please. I do not want to be alone right now." So Henrik stayed, sitting beside her on the bed, holding her hand while she drifted into an uneasy sleep. He watched her face relax as the pain medicine he had given her took effect, watched her breathing even out. In sleep, she looked younger, more vulnerable. The warrior capable of fighting off 3 armed men was gone, replaced by a woman who was hurt and scared and trusting him to keep her safe. Henrik made a decision then. When those hunters came back, and they would come back, he would be ready. No one was going to hurt Greta again. Not while he lived. She slept for most of the day, waking only when the pain got too intense and he gave her more medicine. Henrik kept watch, his rifle loaded and ready, scanning the tree line for any sign of approaching men. By the time evening fell, he was fairly certain they were safe for the night. The hunters had likely retreated to Milford to gather reinforcements. They would not attempt a night assault on his property without knowing what they were dealing with. When Greta woke fully the next morning, she looked better. Her color had improved, and while she winced when she moved, she was clearly on the mend. Orc healing was faster than human, Henrik knew, though still not instantaneous. "How do you feel?" he asked, bringing her tea and some bread with honey, sore, but better. She accepted the food gratefully. "Have they come back?" "Not yet, but they will." Henrik sat down across from her. "Greta, I need you to tell me everything that happened. What did these hunters say? Did they seem organized, or were they just opportunists?" Greta thought for a moment, chewing her bread slowly. "They were young men, probably from Milford. They were not professional hunters. They carried old weapons and spoke loudly about finding the orc that had been spotted in the area. I think someone saw me and reported it to the town." Henrik cursed under his breath. He had feared something like this might happen eventually. "What did they say when they found you?" "That I was a monster. That I would be raiding the town soon, killing people. That they were heroes for finding me first." She looked down at her hands. "I tried to tell them I meant no harm, that I just wanted to be left alone. They did not care. One of them threw a rock at me, and when I dodged it, they took that as aggression. They attacked. And you defended yourself." "Yes, I hurt 2 of them, broke some bones. The 3rd one is the one who stabbed me. When I disarmed him, they all ran." She looked up at Henrik with worried eyes. "They will come back with more men. They will want revenge, and they might come here to your cabin. If they know we are friends, they will think you are a traitor." "Let them think what they want," Henrik said flatly. "You are not going back to that cave. You are staying here where I can protect you." "Henrik, that is not wise. If they find me here, they will burn your cabin. They might kill you." "Then they will have to go through me first." He met her eyes steadily. "I am not letting you go, Greta. I am not letting you be alone and vulnerable while a group of angry men hunts you. That is final." She stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "You are a stubborn man, Henrik Munroe." "I have been told that before," he said with a slight smile. "Now finish your breakfast. You need to keep your strength up while you heal." The hunters came 3 days later, as Henrik had known they would. He saw them from a distance, a group of 8 men approaching his cabin through the forest, moving loudly and with the confidence of people who thought they had numbers on their side. Henrik had spent the intervening days preparing. He had moved Greta up into the small loft above his main room, where she could stay out of sight if necessary. He had checked all his weapons, loaded his rifle, sharpened his hunting knife. He had also set up several strategic positions around his property where he could fall back to if needed. But he was hoping it would not come to violence. When the men were close enough, Henrik stepped out of his cabin and stood on his small porch, his rifle held loosely but visibly in his hands. The men stopped about 20 yards away, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Henrik recognized a few of them from his occasional trips to Milford. Thomas Carter's son was there, and the blacksmith's apprentice, and a few other young men with more bravado than sense. The one who stepped forward to speak was older, probably in his 40s, with a thick beard and hard eyes. Henrik did not know his name, but he recognized the type. A veteran like himself, but one who had not let go of the war. "Henrik Munroe," the man said loudly. "We have business in this area. We are hunting a dangerous orc that has been spotted nearby. We do not want trouble with you, but we will search your property if needed." "There is no dangerous orc here," Henrik said calmly, "and you are not searching my property. This is private land and you are trespassing. I suggest you leave." "We have witnesses who say an orc woman has been seen coming and going from this direction," the bearded man said. "We tracked blood to within a mile of your cabin. We know she is around here somewhere." "Even if there was an orc nearby, why is that your concern?" Henrik asked. "The war is over. We have peace treaties now. Unless this orc has committed a crime, you have no right to hunt her." "Orcs are monsters," one of the younger men shouted. "They do not get rights." Henrik's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "The law says otherwise. The treaty signed 5 years ago grants all orcs the same protections as humans, as long as they are not actively engaged in violence. If you attack an orc without provocation, you are the ones breaking the law." "Nobody is going to enforce that law out here," the bearded man said. "We are the law on the frontier, and we say orcs are not welcome near our town." "This is not near your town," Henrik pointed out. "Milford is 20 miles south. This orc, if she exists, has not come anywhere near your settlement." "Not yet," the bearded man said, "but they always do eventually. It is their nature. Better to deal with the threat before it becomes a problem." Henrik felt his patience wearing thin. These men had already made up their minds. They were not here for a rational discussion. They were here to kill Greta, and they would go through him if necessary. "I am going to say this one more time," Henrik said, his voice dropping to the flat, dangerous tone he had used during the war when giving orders he expected to be followed. "There is no threat here. You are trespassing on my land. Leave now, and I will forget this happened. Stay, and we are going to have a problem. You protecting an orc, Munroe." The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "That what you have been doing out here all alone, consorting with monsters?" "I am protecting my property and my privacy," Henrik said. "What I do on my own land is my business, not yours." The men began muttering among themselves, and Henrik could see the situation deteriorating. His hand tightened slightly on his rifle, not raising it but making sure it was ready. He had fought in enough battles to know when violence was about to break out, and all his instincts were screaming that he was seconds away from a fight. Then Greta's voice rang out from inside the cabin, clear and strong despite her injury. "Henrik is telling the truth. There is no threat here. But if you men want to make one, I will be happy to remind you what happened to your friends who attacked me in my cave." The reaction was immediate. Several of the men reached for weapons, and the bearded man's face darkened with anger. "The orc is here. Munroe, you are harboring a monster. Step aside and let us do what needs to be done." "No," Henrik said flatly. He raised his rifle now, not quite pointing it at anyone but making his intentions clear. "Greta is under my protection. You are not touching her." "Have you lost your mind?" one of the younger men shouted. "It is an orc. They killed your brothers in arms during the war." "And I killed plenty of orcs during the war too," Henrik said coldly. "The war is over. I am done fighting. If you want to keep living in the past, nursing old grudges and perpetuating old hatreds, that is your choice. But you will do it somewhere else, not on my land." The standoff stretched out, tense and dangerous. Henrik kept his breathing steady, his aim ready. He was outnumbered 8-1, but he had the advantage of position and preparation. If it came to shooting, he could drop at least 2 or 3 of them before they reached cover. The question was whether they were willing to take those casualties. The bearded man seemed to be making calculations of his own. "You would kill your own people to protect an orc?" I would kill anyone who threatened someone under my protection, Henrik said. Orc or human does not matter. She is my friend, and I will not let you hurt her. Friend, the man spat. That is not natural. Humans and orcs are not meant to be friends. Who decides what is natural? Henrik asked. You. I am tired of being told who I can and cannot care about. I am tired of fighting wars on behalf of people who do not care about anything but their own hatred. Greta has shown me more kindness and genuine friendship in the past few months than I have received from humans in years. So yes, she is my friend, and no, I will not let you hurt her. There was a long, dangerous moment of silence. Then the bearded man lowered his weapon slightly. You are a fool, Munroe, and you are making an enemy of everyone in Milford with this choice. I can live with that, Henrik said. Can you live with the consequences of forcing this fight? Because I promise you, even if you win, enough of you will die in the process that it will not feel like a victory. The threat was clear and backed up by Henrik's reputation. He might be a recluse now, but people in Milford knew he had been a decorated scout during the war, a man with more confirmed kills than anyone else in the region. He was not making empty boasts. The bearded man stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. This is not over. The town will hear about this. There will be consequences. There usually are, Henrik said. Now get off my property. The men retreated slowly, keeping their weapons ready, clearly not trusting Henrik not to shoot them in the back. Henrik maintained his position on the porch until they were well out of sight, listening to the sounds of their passage through the forest fade into the distance. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he lower his rifle and go back inside. Greta was sitting on the edge of the loft, her legs dangling down, her face pale. You should not have done that, she said quietly. You should not have made them your enemies for me. I did not make them my enemies, Henrik said, setting his rifle carefully by the door. They made themselves my enemies when they decided to hunt someone I care about. Henrik, you do not understand what you have done. The whole town will turn against you now. They will not trade with you. They might even come back to burn your cabin. Then I will deal with that when it happens. Henrik looked up at her seriously. Greta, did you think I would just hand you over to them? Let them kill you to avoid inconvenience? I thought you would be smart enough to protect yourself, she said, and there was frustration in her voice now. I am not worth this. I am just an orc. You are throwing away your entire life for someone who is not even your own kind. Henrik climbed the ladder to the loft and sat down beside her. You keep saying that you are just an orc like it means something, like it makes you worth less than anyone else. It does in this world, Greta said bitterly. You know it does. You fought against my people, you know what we are. I know what I was told you were, Henrik corrected. I was told orcs were monsters, savages, creatures without feelings or honor, but you are none of those things. You are kind and thoughtful and loyal. You brought me flowers. You helped me fix my roof. You tried to leave when you thought you were putting me in danger. He reached out and carefully took her hand. Greta, you are worth fighting for. You are worth protecting. And I do not care what anyone in Milford thinks about that. She looked down at their joined hands, her expression conflicted. Why? Why do you care so much? We have known each other for such a short time. Henrik took a deep breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff but unable to stop himself. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just a friend to me. Because I look forward to your visits more than anything else in my life. Because the thought of you being hurt makes me feel sick. Because when I picture my future, I picture you in it. Greta's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Henrik, what are you saying? I am saying I have feelings for you, Henrik said, his heart pounding. Romantic feelings. I know it is probably crazy. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it could never work, but I cannot pretend anymore. I care about you, Greta, More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I do." She stared at him in shock, her mouth slightly open. For a long, horrible moment, Henrik thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then tears began sliding down her green cheeks, and she made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You care for me. Truly, truly," Henrik confirmed. "I understand if you do not feel the same way. I am not expecting anything. I just needed you to know why I was willing to face down those men, why I will face down anyone who tries to hurt you." "Henrik, you foolish, wonderful man," Greta said, and then she was kissing him. It was awkward at first. Her tusks made the angle difficult, and they bumped noses trying to figure out the logistics. But then they found a rhythm that worked, and Henrik felt like his entire world tilted on its axis. Her lips were warm and surprisingly soft, and she tasted like the peppermint tea she had been drinking earlier. Her hand came up to cup his face, gentle despite her strength, and he felt her trembling slightly. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Greta rested her forehead against his. "I have cared for you since the day you left that first note," she whispered. "Since you told me I did not need to hide, I thought it was impossible. I thought you could never see me as anything but an orc. But you see me as Greta." "You are Greta," Henrik said. "That is all you need to be." They sat together in the loft for a long time, holding each other, processing this new development in their relationship. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. Greta's wound needed to be checked, and Henrik needed to prepare for the possibility that the men might return despite his warnings. Over the next few days, they fell into a new routine. Greta stayed in the cabin, partly because she was still healing and partly because it was safer than returning to her cave. Henrik was hyper-aware of her presence in a way he had not been before, noticing little things like the way she hummed while she worked, or how she always made sure his tea was exactly the temperature he preferred. They talked for hours, sharing more details about their lives and their pasts. Greta told him about growing up in her clan, about the pressure to be a warrior, about the moment she realized she did not want to fight anymore. Henrik told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, about the day he decided to leave civilization behind and build a life in isolation. "Do you regret it?" Greta asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Coming out here alone?" "I did not," Henrik said slowly. "Until I met you. Now I wonder if I was just hiding rather than healing. And now I think maybe healing requires another person. Someone to remind you that life is more than just surviving." He smiled at her. "You did that for me. You brought color back into my world, with wildflowers," Greta said, smiling back. "With wildflowers," Henrik agreed, but their peace was short-lived. A week after the confrontation with the hunters, Thomas Garrett appeared at Henrik's cabin. The old hermit rarely left his own property, so his presence was immediately alarming. "You have stirred up a hornet's nest, boy," Thomas said without preamble when Henrik opened the door. "The whole town is talking about you and the orc. They are saying you have gone mad, that you are a traitor. The mayor is talking about sending a formal militia out here to deal with the situation." Henrik's stomach sank. "A militia? That is excessive." "They are scared," Thomas said. "Scared of orcs, scared of the idea that the war might not actually be over. Some folks are saying if there is one orc here, there might be more, that you might be helping them scout for a raid." "That is absurd." "Of course it is absurd, but fear makes people stupid." Thomas peered past Henrik into the cabin. "She really in there? The orc?" "Her name is Greta," Henrik said. "And yes, she is here. Can I meet her? I am curious about any creature that could make you throw away your peaceful life." Henrik hesitated, then stepped back and gestured for Thomas to enter. Greta was sitting at the table, her posture tense, clearly having heard the entire conversation. She stood as Thomas entered, and the old man stopped to study her with frank curiosity. "Well," Thomas said after a moment, "you are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Greta asked warily. "Something more monstrous, I suppose, but you just look like a woman with different colored skin." Thomas moved further into the cabin and settled into a chair without being invited. "I am Thomas Garrett. I live down south of here. I have known Henrik since he first came to this area." "I am Greta," she said, still standing. "I mean no harm to Henrik or to anyone else." "I believe you," Thomas said. "Question is, how do we convince the folks in Milford of that?" "We cannot," Henrik said flatly. "They have already made up their minds. Greta is a monster to them, and I am a traitor for protecting her." "Probably true," Thomas agreed. "But that leaves you with limited options. You can leave the area entirely, find somewhere new to start over. You can stay and fight, which will likely end with both of you dead. Or you can try diplomacy, though I admit that seems unlikely to work given current sentiments." "There is another option," Greta said quietly. "I can leave. Henrik can tell everyone I moved on that he does not know where I went. His reputation will recover eventually, and he can go back to his peaceful life." "No," Henrik said immediately. "We have been over this. You are not leaving." "Henrik, be reasonable. Thomas is right. If we stay together, someone will get hurt, probably many someones." Greta's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I will not be responsible for your death. I will not be the reason you lose everything." "You are the reason I have anything worth keeping," Henrik said roughly. He turned to Thomas. "Is there really no way to make them see reason? To make them understand that Greta is not a threat?" Thomas stroked his beard thoughtfully. "There might be one way. It is risky and will require you to trust me, but if it works, it could solve everything." "What is your idea?" Henrik asked. "Bring her to town. Let people meet her. Let them see she is not a monster." Both Henrik and Greta stared at him in shock. "That is suicide," Henrik said flatly. "They will kill her on sight." "Not if you do it right," Thomas said. "You go in during the day openly with advance warning. You send a message to the mayor. Tell him you want to address the town council, that you want to clear up misunderstandings. Make it formal and official. They will not risk killing her in front of witnesses if it is a sanctioned meeting." "You have too much faith in human decency," Greta said. "Maybe," Thomas admitted. "But I have faith in human self-interest. If Henrik makes this a formal matter involving the mayor and the council, then any violence against you becomes an official incident. One that could bring scrutiny from the territorial governor, maybe even federal marshals. Most of the hotheads in town will back down when faced with potential legal consequences." Henrik considered this. It was risky, incredibly risky, but Thomas had a point. The hunters who had come to his cabin had been a mob, acting outside official channels. If he forced the issue into official channels, it became much harder for his enemies to simply resort to violence. "What would I even say to the council?" Henrik asked. "The truth," Thomas said. "That Greta is a peaceful refugee from her clan, that she has harmed no one, that she is protected under the treaty accords. You make it a legal matter, not an emotional one. You force them to follow their own laws." "And if they do not?" Greta asked. "Then we fight," Henrik said. "But we will have tried the peaceful route first." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Thomas returned to Milford to make the arrangements, speaking to the mayor and requesting a formal town council meeting. Henrik and Greta rehearsed what they would say, anticipating hostile questions and preparing responses. On the morning they were scheduled to appear, Henrik dressed in his best clothes, the ones he had not worn since leaving the military. He helped Greta clean and patch her own clothing, making sure she looked as presentable as possible. She was terrified, he could see it in her eyes, but she faced the prospect of walking into a hostile human town with the same courage she had shown in everything else. "We do not have to do this," Henrik said as they prepared to leave. "We can still run, head north into the territories where there are fewer people." "No," Greta said firmly. "If there is a chance to build a real life here, a life where we do not have to hide, then we have to try. I am tired of running." They rode into Milford on Henrik's horse, sitting close together, both hyper-aware of the stares they received as they passed through the outskirts of town. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, some pointing, some calling out insults. Henrik kept his hand near his rifle, ready for trouble, but no one actually tried to stop them. The town hall was a simple wooden building in the center of Milford, and a crowd had already gathered outside when they arrived. Henrik helped Greta down from the horse, ignoring the hostile muttering from the assembled townspeople. Thomas was waiting by the door, his expression grim but determined. "They are ready for you," the old man said. "Remember, stay calm, stick to facts, and do not let them provoke you into anger." The council chamber was a single large room with a table at the front where 5 men sat. Henrik recognized the mayor, a portly man named James Burton. The others were local business owners and landholders, the de facto leadership of Milford. Every seat in the room was filled with townspeople who had come to witness the spectacle. "Henrik Munroe," Mayor Burton said as they entered. "Thank you for coming, and this must be the orc we have heard so much about." "Her name is Greta," Henrik said firmly. "And she has come here in good faith to address the concerns that have been raised." "Very well," the mayor said. He did not offer them seats, forcing them to stand before the council like criminals on trial. "Mr. Munroe, you are accused of harboring a dangerous orc on your property, of threatening citizens who were attempting to ensure the safety of our town, and of consorting with the enemy in a manner that violates both law and decency. How do you respond?" Henrik had known this would be hostile, but hearing the accusations laid out so formally still made his blood boil. He forced himself to speak calmly. "I respond that every one of those accusations is false or misleading. Greta is not dangerous. She is a refugee from her clan who has harmed no one. The citizens who came to my property were not ensuring safety. They were engaged in illegal vigilante action against someone who had committed no crime. And there is no law, either local or territorial, that forbids peaceful association between humans and orcs under the terms of the treaty accords signed 5 years ago. The treaty accords are meant for formal relations between governments," one of the council members said, "not for individual humans to take up with orc women. The treaty accords specifically state that all orcs are granted the same legal protections as humans, provided they are not engaged in active hostilities," Henrik countered. "There is no provision limiting peaceful interaction or association. If you disagree, I invite you to cite the specific legal statute that prohibits what I am doing." The council members exchanged glances, clearly not expecting Henrik to know the actual legal details. In truth, he had spent the last 2 days reading and rereading the copy of the treaty accords that Thomas had brought him, memorizing every relevant section. "Even if there is no specific law," the mayor said, "there is common decency. Humans and orcs do not mix. It goes against the natural order." "With respect, sir, you do not get to legislate decency or natural order," Henrik said. "The law is clear. Greta has committed no crime. She is entitled to live peacefully without harassment. The men who came to my property and threatened her were the ones breaking the law, not me." "She is an orc." Someone shouted from the crowd. "They killed our people during the war." "And humans killed orcs during the war," Henrik shot back. "Including me, I have more orc blood on my hands than probably anyone in this room, But the war is over. We have peace now. Or are you suggesting we should continue killing each other indefinitely? Let the orc speak, a woman called from the back. Let her defend herself if she is so peaceful. Mayor Burton looked uncomfortable but nodded. Very well. Greta, you may address the council. Greta stepped forward and Henrik saw her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I know you fear me. I understand. I would fear me too if I only knew what you have been told about orcs, but I am not here to hurt anyone. I was cast out from my clan because I refused to continue fighting. I did not want to kill anymore. I did not want to raid and burn and cause suffering. So my own people exiled me, called me a traitor and a coward. She paused, looking around the room at the hostile faces. I have been living alone in the forest for many months. I hunt for my food, I stay away from human settlements, I bother no one. Then I met Henrik. He showed me kindness when he had no reason to. He treated me like a person, not a monster. And yes, we have become friends. Is that really so terrible? Is the idea of friendship between our peoples really more frightening than the idea of eternal hatred? There was silence in the room. Greta took a shaky breath and continued. I know some young men came to my cave and attacked me. I defended myself, but I did not kill them. I could have. I am trained as a warrior and they were inexperienced, but I did not want their blood on my hands. I scared them off and thought that would be the end of it. Instead, they brought more men to Henrik's home, trying to finish what they started. And Henrik protected me. Because he has been bewitched, someone muttered. No, Greta said firmly. Because he is a good man who sees injustice and stands against it. That is what you should be celebrating about him, not condemning him for. She looked directly at the mayor. I am asking you, all of you, to give me a chance. Let me prove that I am not a threat. I will make a binding oath, witnessed by this council, that I will never raise my hand in violence against any human except in direct self-defense. I will submit to periodic checks by any authority you designate. I will do whatever is needed to earn your trust. But please, do not force Henrik to choose between his community and doing what he knows is right. Do not punish a good man for showing mercy. The silence that followed her speech was profound. Henrik saw several people in the crowd looking uncomfortable, their certainty shaken. Others still looked hostile, but even they seemed less aggressive than before. Mayor Burton cleared his throat. That was quite a speech, but words are easy. How do we know you will keep such an oath? Because my word is all I have, Greta said simply. I have no clan, no family, no home except what I can build for myself. My honor is the only thing I own completely. I will not dishonor it with false promises. One of the council members, an older woman Henrik recognized as the owner of the general store, leaned forward. I have a question. What are your intentions with Mr. Munroe? Are you just friends, or is there something more happening here? The room seemed to hold its breath. Henrik and Greta exchanged a glance. They had not discussed how to answer this question, had not decided whether to admit the full truth of their relationship. Henrik made the decision for both of them. We are courting, he said clearly. I care for Greta deeply and she cares for me. Our relationship has romantic intent. The room erupted in shocked muttering and outright gasps. The mayor banged his hand on the table for quiet. That is outrageous, one of the council members sputtered. A human and an orc. It is unnatural. It is unusual, Henrik corrected. But again, not illegal. I have checked. There is no law, either territorial or local, that prohibits romantic relationships between species. And before you claim it goes against religious teaching, I remind you that our faith teaches love and acceptance of all beings created by the divine. This is madness, the council member said, but he sounded less certain now. The old woman from the general store spoke again. I fought in the war too, lost my husband to an orc raid. I have every reason to hate them." She looked at Greta. "But I am tired of hating. I am tired of being afraid. If this young woman is truly willing to make peace, to live peacefully among us, then maybe we should accept that." "You cannot be serious, Martha," another council member said. "I am completely serious, Richard," Martha replied. "The war cost us all something. But continuing to fight it in our hearts costs us even more. I say we accept her oath, let her prove herself, and if she breaks her word, then we deal with it. But give her the chance." There was more debate, more arguments back and forth. But slowly, Henrik could see the tide turning. Not everyone was convinced, but enough people were willing to at least consider the possibility that Greta was sincere. Finally, the mayor called for a vote. 3 of the 5 council members voted to accept Greta's oath and grant her permission to remain in the area under probationary terms. It was not a ringing endorsement, but it was enough. Greta took the oath formally, swearing before the council and the assembled townspeople that she would live peacefully and harm no human except in defense of her own life. When she finished, there was scattered applause, though also some angry muttering. As they left the town hall, several people approached them. Some were hostile, warning Henrik that they were watching and any sign of trouble would be dealt with harshly. But others were cautiously friendly. Martha from the general store shook Greta's hand and told her she was welcome to shop there. A farmer offered to trade vegetables for any game Greta might hunt. Small gestures, but meaningful. By the time they rode back toward Henrik's cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Henrik felt exhausted but also strangely hopeful. They had done it. Against all odds, they had convinced enough people to give Greta a chance. "I cannot believe that worked," Greta said quietly as they rode. "Neither can I," Henrik admitted. "Thomas was right. Sometimes people just need to be reminded that laws exist for a reason." "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Henrik said. "We build a life together. We prove to everyone that this can work." When they reached the cabin, they found a small surprise waiting on the porch. A basket covered with a cloth, and a note that simply read "Welcome" in handwriting Henrik did not recognize. Inside the basket were fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and a small bouquet of wildflowers. Greta picked up the flowers with trembling hands. "Someone left us a gift. Looks like we already have at least one ally in town," Henrik said. That night, they sat together by the fire closer than they had dared to sit before. Greta's head rested on Henrik's shoulder and his arm was wrapped around her waist, carefully avoiding her still healing wound. "Henrik," Greta said softly. "Yes." "When you told the council we were courting, did you mean it? Or were you just trying to be honest about the situation?" Henrik turned to look at her, seeing vulnerability in her amber eyes. "I meant it. I want to court you properly, Greta. I want to build a future with you if you will have me." She smiled, her tusks catching the firelight. "I will have you, Henrik Munroe. I will have you and I will keep you and I will bring you wildflowers for the rest of my life if you will let me." "I will definitely let you," Henrik said, and kissed her again, losing himself in the warmth and rightness of holding her close. The next several months passed in a rhythm that felt almost magical to Henrik. He and Greta settled into a life together, working to expand and improve the cabin to accommodate both of them comfortably. They added a proper bedroom with a larger bed, and Greta contributed her own touches to the decoration, hanging herbs from the rafters and making curtains from cloth she traded for in town. The relationship with Milford remained complicated but gradually improved. Greta made monthly appearances in town, always accompanied by Henrik at first, later becoming confident enough to go alone. She traded game and furs, helped repair buildings with her strength, and slowly won over skeptics through consistent peaceful behavior and genuine helpfulness. There were still those who refused to accept her, who muttered darkly about the unnaturalness of a human-orc relationship. But they were increasingly in the minority. Most people, when confronted with Greta's actual personality rather than their assumptions about orcs, found it hard to maintain their hostility. Henrik found himself happier than he had been in years, perhaps happier than he had ever been. Greta brought joy and laughter into his life. She challenged him intellectually, pushed him to be better, and loved him with a fierce devotion that still sometimes took his breath away. They learned each other's bodies slowly and with great tenderness, navigating the small differences between human and orc anatomy with patience and humor. Greta was self-conscious about her tusks at first, worried they would make intimacy difficult. But Henrik loved every part of her and made sure she knew it. Winter came, and this year Greta did not have to face it alone in a cold cave. She and Henrik kept each other warm through the long, dark months, telling stories by the fire, making plans for the spring, existing in a bubble of contentment that felt almost too good to be real. It was during a late winter snowstorm that Henrik decided he wanted to make their arrangement permanent. He was watching Greta knead bread dough at the kitchen table, her strong hands working the flour and water with practiced ease, humming one of the orc songs she had taught him. The afternoon light through the window caught in her black hair, making it shine, and Henrik felt such a surge of love that he could barely breathe. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Greta stopped humming, her hands stilling in the dough. She turned to look at him slowly. "What?" "Marry me," Henrik repeated, standing and crossing to her. "I know it is unconventional. I know there are still people who would oppose it, but I do not care. I want you to be my wife, Greta. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, officially and legally." Her eyes were wide, her expression stunned. "Henrik, we cannot marry. There are no laws for such a thing. No church would perform the ceremony." "Then we will make our own ceremony," Henrik said. "We will marry in the way that matters most, by pledging ourselves to each other before witnesses who care about us. Thomas will stand for me. We can find someone to stand for you." "I have no one," Greta said quietly. "Then Thomas will stand for both of us," Henrik said firmly. "The point is not the formality, Greta. The point is the commitment. I want to commit to you fully forever. Will you have me?" Tears spilled down her green cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Henrik Munroe. I will be your wife and you will be my husband, and we will make our own path together." He kissed her then, tasting the salt of her tears and the flour on her lips, holding her close and feeling like his heart might burst from happiness. They married in early spring, on a clear day when the first flowers were just beginning to bloom. Thomas officiated, reading from a combination of human marriage rites and orc bonding traditions that Greta had taught him. They exchanged simple rings that Henrik had commissioned from the blacksmith in Milford, bands of silver engraved with intertwined oak leaves and mountain asters. A small group attended the ceremony, held in the clearing beside Henrik's cabin. Martha from the general store came, along with a few other people from town who had become genuine friends. Even the mayor made an appearance, though he stayed only briefly and did not look entirely comfortable. When Henrik and Greta spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, there was not a dry eye among the witnesses. Even Thomas, gruff old hermit that he was, had to wipe at his face when Greta pledged herself to Henrik, as moon to stars, as river to sea, as earth to sky, forever joined and never parted. After the ceremony, they held a simple feast. Greta had hunted a deer, and Henrik had prepared it with herbs and vegetables from their garden. There was bread and cheese, preserves and pie, and mead that Thomas had brought from his own stores. As the sun set and their few guests departed, Henrik and Greta stood together in front of their cabin, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Henrik asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Greta said. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes bright even in the twilight. "When I left my clan, I thought my life was over. I thought I would be alone forever, but you showed me that endings can also be beginnings." "You showed me the same thing," Henrik said. "I was dead inside when you found me, just going through the motions of living. You brought me back to life." "With wildflowers," Greta said, smiling. "With wildflowers," Henrik agreed. They went inside as full darkness fell, closing the door on the world outside and existing only for each other. The cabin that had once been a refuge from pain and loss had become a home filled with love and hope. On the table, in the same chipped clay pitcher that had started everything, a fresh bouquet of wildflowers stood in testimony to the impossible becoming real. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still incidents of prejudice, still moments when Henrik and Greta had to defend their right to exist together. But they faced each challenge as they faced everything, together, with courage and conviction. They had children eventually, 3 of them, each unique and beautiful and bearing characteristics of both their parents. The births caused fresh controversy in Milford. But by then, Henrik and Greta had proven themselves so thoroughly as valuable members of the community that even the staunchest objectors had to grudgingly accept the situation. Their eldest, a daughter they named Helena, had her mother's green skin but her father's brown eyes. Their son Henrik Jr. had human coloring but small tusks like his mother. Their youngest, little Lily, was somewhere in between, with green-tinted skin and pointed ears but an entirely human face. The children grew up knowing both human and orc traditions, learning to read and write from their father and to hunt and track from their mother. They were accepted by most of the children in Milford, becoming bridges between communities that had been enemies for generations. As Henrik grew older, watching silver creep into his dark hair, he sometimes reflected on how different his life had turned out from anything he could have imagined. He had expected to live and die alone, a bitter veteran haunted by memories of war. Instead, he had found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. On a late summer evening, nearly 20 years after that first mysterious bouquet of wildflowers had appeared in his kitchen, Henrik sat on his porch watching the sunset with Greta beside him. Their children were inside, arguing cheerfully about something inconsequential. The sound of their laughter drifted out through the open windows. "You ever regret it?" Greta asked softly. "Choosing me, choosing this life?" Henrik turned to look at his wife, seeing the same beautiful woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago, just with more lines around her eyes and more silver in her hair to match his own. "Not for a single moment," he said truthfully. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Greta. You and our children and this life we built together. I would not change any of it." She smiled and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of 2 decades together. "I feel the same. Thank you for seeing past what I was supposed to be and seeing who I actually was. Thank you for bringing me wildflowers," Henrik said. "Thank you for caring about a lonely stranger. Thank you for being brave enough to keep coming back even when it was dangerous." "I would do it all again," Greta said. "Every moment, every risk, every challenge, all of it was worth it to have this." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and deep blue. Inside the cabin, their children's laughter continued, the sound of a family at peace. And on the table, because some traditions were too precious to ever abandon. A fresh bouquet of wildflowers stood in that same chipped clay pitcher, testament to the love that had started with a small act of kindness and grown into something that changed not just two lives, but an entire community's understanding of what was possible when people chose connection over fear. Henrik had come home one day to find fresh wildflowers in his kitchen, and the orc girl had pretended she knew nothing. But that small deception, born of loneliness and hope, had bloomed into the greatest truth of his life: that love could grow anywhere, between anyone, if given the chance. And sometimes, the most beautiful gardens grew in the most unlikely soil.